Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome once again to Wake the Nation. We're live. We're being broadcast over on Facebook. It's another Wake the Nation. It's this month's, the month of June's Wake the Nation. We'll be off for July and August, and we'll resume in September. And we have some hot topics. I also have some showcases. If you have noticed that I had paused on the showcase, but I have some new showcases and interesting topics coming up for the next, Wake the Nation that we'll be having. So that being said, today's Wake the Nation is about wills, right? And I know, there are those who have already got their wills together, and there are some that have not. Uh, the reason why we're discussing this is that, hold on a second, one quick second. Okay. Yeah. All right. The reason why we're discussing wills is I don't know about you. So let me see a show of hands if you've ever had your inheritance taken from you simply because there were no wills. So I've been in that position. My children have been in that position as well. So, there are crystals on here. We're just here to share some information, just so you can be abreast. There are things I learned after the fact, wish I'd known before. So just wanted to say, I came across the scripture that tells us, I know that when the wealthy amass their wealth or property, usually there's a will, okay? And so I came across the scripture, though, that said you're not supposed to just leave an inheritance for your children, but also your grandchildren. And so, rightfully, it is best that we think about our kids and even grandchildren. Yeah, and you may not see them inside, but as my mom used to say, when you have deep eye, you cry soon, meaning that you look beyond, you project into the future. And so, to make wise decisions. And that being said, we're going to talk about wills, beneficiaries, power of attorney, healthcare, and directives. Miss Crystal Collier, one of my co-hosts, she'll be discussing that. And then my other co-host, Thais Love, will be discussing blended families with wills. And so as we get into the topic, I just wanted to say, let me just read this to you. Who does your estate go to if you have no will? We know that a will at its basic level is a set of instructions, right? Just telling folks what to do, what the directives are. Like basically that's what it is. But for New York State residents without a will, a surviving spouse inherits the entire probate estate if there are no children or other descendants. If there are descendants, the surviving spouse gets the first 50,000, doesn't matter how much you have, they get that, and the balance is divided 1/2 to the spouse and 1/2 to the descendants. So the spouse gets 50,000, then 1/2 of what's left, and then the rest is left for the kids. Think about that. That's New York State, but we know that it varies from state to state. So it's important that I would suggest that you check out the state that you're in, right? So if there are no descendants and no spouse, the probate estate instead passes to the decedents, sorry, did I say descendants? The decedents, sorry, the person who's deceased. It passes on to their parents. But if there are no parents, then who do you think is going to get it? If there are no surviving family members, the probate estate will exchequer it will go to the state. So, Crystal?
Can you make me co-host? Can you hear me?
Now, yeah.
Can you make me co-host?
Okay. Yes, I can. Hold on. Just a minute. Okay. Good evening. Hold on. Okay. Hold on.
Mute yourself. There we go. All right, good evening. So really briefly, can you see my screen? I just wanted to discuss estate planning and wills. According to freewill.com, which is a free website, 70% of adults do not have a will. And like you were saying, Mom, when you don't have a will, your things go to the state. And how the state, which is a public place, have all your assets, they have access to do what they want with your money. And in some states, it can take 1 to 2 years after someone passes to even for your relatives or those who you would have wanted to get access to, what you've earned in your lifetime. Oop, let me go back. 1 to 2 years is a really long time. And that doesn't guarantee that it does go to who you want it to. The other point that I've known Ms. Tace is going to touch on is family dynamics. And as those changed, we have to be sure to review our estate planning once a year. Births, adoptions, deaths, retirements, marriages and divorces, and other major financial changes impact the way we divide what we have and how we want it distributed. And in case nobody knows the difference, a will spells out how you want your affairs handled after you pass. A trust is a fiduciary arrangement where a trustor, guarantor is an interchangeable term, gives a trustee the right to hold and manage your assets for the benefit of a specific person or purpose. And so having a trust helps you avoid probate, courts, and public records, and allowing the management of your property or finances to be handled privately. So typically people who own businesses or homes will have a trust, or should have a trust, I should say. And the different things that you need to touch on in living wills and trusts are supporting the people and causes that you care about after you're gone, because it's not just people. If you want to give your money to Cats and Dogs of America, you very well can. You can say 10% of all I've earned goes to the Red Cross. You can also donate even after you pass. Financial power of attorneys, if you're ever unable to make decisions because of whatever medical state you're in, you designate a person you trust to manage your finances. And of course, these are all morbid things that we really don't want to think about, but ultimately we have to. Beneficiary designations, again, something that needs to be revisited annually, distributes your assets, and so that your will covers your 401k, any IRS filings, life insurance, privately held or any employer held policies, and of course, our advanced healthcare directives. This allows you to take the lead and plan the end of life medical care decisions. If, again, this is something, if ever you'll ever need it, so that your family knows what to do if ever, God forbid, you're incapacitated or, many different health situations arise. But to say that they know what you would have want done or how you would want your medical care to be handled is for some very important. And just a few resources. I did put the link for freewill.com and we can post that afterwards. It is a free resource. It'll take you about 20 to 30 minutes if you go through it and you know what you want to put, or if you don't have a lot to put. Your company, whoever your employer, may have an EAP program. That's the Employee Assistance Program, which I think most employers have, if not all. And that will have free resources to help you gain access or, begin the process. Also, if you're enrolled in a company benefit such as Legal Shield, and I think there are a few other different ones, they are helpful, but they can be costly because those assign you an office local to you. That doesn't mean that you're going to get a good attorney. That doesn't mean that you don't have to continue pay for it. It just, they say it limits the costs. But again, these attorney offices associated with Legal Shield, you can get good ones. Sometimes you won't. But it's Legal Shield it's good for some, if you like, again, if you get a good office, but if you're not, I wouldn't say go the Legal Shield route. AARP is not just for seniors. It is open to people of all ages. There are plenty of benefits for $12 a year. Sometimes they have promos for $9 a year, but it does provide non-profit resources for estate and will planning. So again, if you're 21, you can enroll in AARP. It is not for seniors and retirees only. State and local organizations also have free resources and workshops for you to learn more. So I would encourage anyone and everyone to look into what is provided to them locally. And that's it.
Thanks, Crystal, for, hold on one second. I don't know why the camera is doing this, but it's like just causing it to blur. Thanks, Crystal, once again for giving us that information that we so well need to hear. As I stated before, in this country and in other countries all around the world, there are folks who have lost out on inheritances simply because there were no wills and weren't even aware. Something that I learned of, and this actually happened to the father of my kids, that his father was married to his spouse, but they were separated for years, more than 7 years, a number of years. I can't remember how many. I don't remember if at the time when he passed, it might have been like 14 or 15 years had passed. He didn't even know where his spouse was. But when he passed, she was notified, and she ended up, the estate went to her, the house and everything that was there, and she never distributed anything. She took it all. So just, another reason just for us to pay attention to the information that Crystal disseminated to us, and for the free resources that are there. And as she said, AARP is not just for older folks, it's for young folks as well. And, and it's not a matter of saying that you're looking forward to not no longer being, but just to make wise and conscious decisions. This is why the wealthy, they do it and they adjust their wills as more, wealth is amassed, or whatever happens. Or sometimes they may sell properties or buy properties, acquire more, then they make the adjustments that way. So it's not a matter of thinking, it's just as I remembered years ago, one of my aunts, she took out an insurance for me, that when I became a teenager, I'd get it. And so, there are things that you can always do for family members, for your kids, when they get older, going off to college, that can, excuse me, that can benefit them. So we just want to share this. And as I said, I've come across enough people. I've been to court with some folks. I've accompanied folks, not not family members, but I've accompanied folks within my community that have asked me to go. And, as I said, I've been learning, what I didn't know, even for myself. So just wanted to share that with you and hope that it does help. Now I will ask Ms. Dice, are you ready to present?
Yes, I am. Yes. Pardon me, I am in the car, and so I have some background noise, and with my grandson and everything. But good evening, everyone. I just want everybody to understand. Thank you so much, Crystal, for laying out the details of the different things that you would need a will for, and how to, how to ensure that your assets get distributed the way you want to. And one of the things in ensuring that your assets get distributed the way you want to, particularly when there is a remarriage situation or your family dynamic changes in a certain kind of way. For example, if you get married again, get divorced from one spouse and remarried, and you have children with the prior spouse, the first spouse, you really have to ensure that and spell it out clearly who and where do you want your assets to go. Your particularly in New York State, but across the board, once you get married, your spouse becomes your next of kin. Okay. So if you are a young man, and you have your parents are still alive, and you have brothers, they, you get married, your parents are not your next of kin. Your brothers are not your next of kin. Your wife becomes your next of kin. Okay. And then after your wife, if you and that wife have children, while you and that wife are still married, then the children become the next of kin. Okay. If you get married and there are no children, the wife is the next of kin. And then after the wife, then your parents, and then your siblings, okay? If there are no children. If you get married to that spouse and you don't get divorced, okay? A lot of people get legally separated, or they simply, leave the abode with that spouse, and they and maybe move to another state and pick up a whole new life in that next state. Never got the divorce though. They just physically separated. You are still on record as married, and that separated spouse is still your next of kin.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so many people make that error that, they are with their spouse, and then, for whatever reason, they decide that they're going to go their separate ways. If you're going to go your separate ways from your spouse, you gotta, handle all the paperwork and seriously separate legally, financially, as well as physically. You can't just physically leave and then after so many years, you're not considered married. marriage licenses do not have expiration dates. Okay, they do not. So if you decide that you are going to separate from your current spouse, don't just file legal separation. You have to file for the divorce so that the paperwork is on record that you are that your spouse is no longer your spouse. Okay. Even before you get into the next relationship with the next person. That's another thing that happens, is that people, they physically separate from their spouse, and 10 years go by, and then they get into a relationship with the next person, and they want to get married, and they want to start their lives with this next person, but they didn't handle the business of legally separating from that first spouse. So then they wind up trying to get married. And in some states, there's a thing called common law marriage, meaning that if you live with someone for more than a certain number of years, I know in South Carolina, it's 7 years. If you live with the person, cohabitate with the person for 7 years or more, then you are considered, that other person is considered your spouse. Considered, though. All right? It's not in paper and writing.
Mm-hmm.
They just, when people see you and they see you with this other person, they just assume that that person is your wife, because that's the only person that they saw you with, in the past 7 years. But common law marriage does not hold up in all of the states. New York does not recognize common law marriage. New York does not recognize any other kind of partnership per se like that, living arrangement, except marriage. Okay, you can file for a legal partnership arrangement, but that is still not marriage. Okay, a legal partnership arrangements, that's what they had. That was what was in place in states that did not legally recognize or allow same-sex marriages. Okay, New York State has a partnership arrangement law, and New York State now allows for same-sex marriages. So people of same-sex partnerships, they have an option. They have two options, actually. But still, marriage in writing, filed, takes precedent. So if you separated from your spouse here in New York, you went down to South Carolina, you decided you're going to stay with this person for 10 years. And in South Carolina, you're considered common law married, right? But your New York assets will not go to that common law married person in South Carolina. Your New York assets will be distributed according to what your marital arrangement was here in New York. So that spouse that you separated from 30 years ago here in New York, and you went down to South Carolina and you common law married to somebody in South Carolina, when you close your eyes, your assets that you have, even the assets down in South Carolina, will go to the spouse that's here in New York. because
Wow.
marriage, the marriage license takes precedent over all other partnership, relationship arrangements, even common law marriage. The marriage license takes precedent across the country. So if you're in a situation where you are separated, legally separated, physically separated, if you know for certain that you are not going back to that person, it would be to your best interest and your family members' best interest that you go ahead and simply file for the divorce. Otherwise, when you are no longer here, it'll get crazy and people will be highly disappointed, confused, and all of that. So I would recommend highly, if you know you're not going back to that spouse, just go ahead and file the proper paperwork. Because otherwise, when you're no longer able to speak for yourself, what's in writing, what is filed, that is going to speak for you. Okay. Even when the one spouse transitions, right, and that spouse that transition may not be in the same state or anything where their other spouse that they separated from is. But when that spouse transitions, the hospital or wherever you transitioned at will look for the next of kin. And the next of kin is the last person they were on file as married to. Okay. I once had a relative that had legally separated from her husband over 30 years. When she wound up transitioning at the hospice, she had brothers, sisters, she even had children. They all came to the hospital to claim her body and get ready to make arrangements. Hospital would not release her body to anyone else except that estranged husband that she separated from legally 30 years before. So somebody had to go in the family and go find him, let him know that, his estranged wife had passed and that he has to come down to the hospital simply to claim her remains and so that the hospital could release the body. And he did that. And when it came down to her assets from her job and everything, guess who got her assets?
He did.
Not her children.
He did.
Not her brothers and sisters and everything that was there for her and all that. That estranged husband that she left 30 years ago got everything. It didn't even go to her sons, who he was their father.
Wow.
Okay, so that's just a note to self that take the extra time and file your paperwork accordingly. If it's filed and it's in writing, then there is no confusion. There's no guesswork in terms of, okay, who's supposed to get what. And so that's very important. If you are separated or if you're divorced and you are, in the next relationship, you're courting or you're in the next relationship and you are considering marrying this person, you have to have the discussion with that future next spouse. You have to sit down and have the discussion about, okay, I have some assets, and this is what I like to happen. Or, do you have, what assets do you have, or what have you, so that if you remarry, your assets are not necessarily going to go to your children from the previous marriage. Does not. Again, the spouse that you have, it will go to that person is your next of kin. Okay, so and that second spouse comes ahead of your children from the first marriage. Okay, so you would have to really have that discussion with that person to make sure that they understand that this is what your wishes are. If you don't take that time out to discuss that, yeah, your children will be highly disappointed and confused. Another thing that you can do if you are considering remarrying is have them sign a prenup. A prenuptial agreement is simply an agreement. I need you to be quiet. It's simply an agreement that just lays out certain terms that you and your future new spouse agree on with regards to your assets, with regards to anything, the length of the marriage, and if there are additional children that you are considering having, you can agree and put those things in a prenuptial agreement where that spells out everything that you'd like to happen in your marriage, your future marriage and beyond. So some people, they kind of feel a way about prenuptial agreements. Some people feel like, oh, it's a trust thing, and why do we have to do that? It's a contract. You don't trust me? No, it's not about trust at all. It's not about trust at all. It is simply an agreement. It's a contract. Marriage license is a contract. Okay. The prenuptial agreement is an additional contract that you have in addition to the marriage license. And it just makes everything plain in terms of what it is that you would like to happen with in terms of inheritance, property, assets, how you like them to be distributed, if you want them to be distributed, so that spouse, the future spouse, would understand what it is that they would gain or not get once they marry. Once they marry you, okay.
And may I say something? For
Sure.
the blended family, I
Sure.
don't know if you want to get into this, but for the
Yes.
blended family, if you have children, let's say the potential, the new wife and the new spouse both have children from before. That's, I've also known of situations that have gone way down the river the other way, because when they got married and because there was no will, the spouse got it, and so his children got it, and then her children.
I did touch on that. That's why I said It's important because once you remarry, your spouse becomes your very next of kin. So if there are children that you have from a previous relationship, and you remarry, because your new spouse is your next of kin, they get to decide which kids get what. And of course, they're going to make sure that, their kids get, and, your kids may not necessarily get. So that's why it's very, very important to have that discussion beforehand, so that, it's no confusion. There's no one gets slighted. And everybody's on the same. So yeah, definitely. And a lot of times when they don't always consider their future spouse's relationship with their children from a previous marriage or from a previous relationship, especially when they have children with the next spouse. The concentration goes to the children with that next spouse, and the children from the previous relationship kind of get overlooked, and that could happen on both ends. I've known of situations where a couple got married, and they had grown children from previous relationships. And then when they got together, they had children together, and the grown children on both sides felt the way about them two having children together, because the grown children felt like, well, you didn't consider us at all, and now you having a whole different family, and what about us, and a lot of times those grown adult children from the previous relationship will antagonize the marriage, because they felt left out or neglected, or were for fear that they would be left out of their inheritance because new younger siblings have come along. So the family dynamic has to be discussed. It's best to discuss it before you get married, during the courtship, and not only discuss it between the couple, but the couple then discuss it with all of the children, so that everybody's on the same page, everybody understands, and everybody can act accordingly. If one spouse has children from a previous relationship and the other spouse doesn't have any children at all, it's no guarantee that the children from the previous relationship will get that spouse's assets. It will still go to the spouse that didn't have any children, because that person is that spouse who had children next of kin. So these are things that you have to consider when considering remarriage. Take the time out to have those uncomfortable conversations. Talk about the possibility of signing a prenup. The prenup, it's not about a trust thing. It's simply an instrument that protects the inheritance of your children, and of your family. Because things that when you get married, assets that you got before the marriage, that's, you know, the next spouse doesn't have access to that at all. So like if, you know, you got married at 40, but your parents or your grandparents gave you a piece of property when you were 25. That happened before the marriage. So that, you know, the fact that you're getting married, that spouse does not have access to the inheritance that your family gave you before the marriage. That spouse only has access to assets that were accrued during the marriage. During the marriage. And so, but things that happened that you accrued before the marriage, that is yours. And if you want to share that with your spouse, that's up to you, but you don't have to. But the things that you accrue during the marriage, that is very much, the spouse is entitled to 50% of it, half, okay, across the board. And so if you two decide to get divorced, that's when that stuff comes into play. The spouse, the divorcing couple, their assets, on both spouses' assets, get divided evenly in half. And then after it's evenly divided in half, each spouse can decide what they would like to give to their children if there are children in the marriage. Okay, but neither parent has to give anything to the children. If they want to, they can. But once, you know, the divorce has happened and assets are split down the middle 50-50, then it's up to the individual parents to decide what they want to do with it. And, you know, one parent might decide, well, no, I don't want to give the children anything. I want to take all of mine with me and go into my next life, you know, and there is no law against that. There is no law against that. So children that feel entitled or think it's automatic that they're going to get what mama and dad had, that is not true. That is a myth. And neither parents have to give the children anything. They don't have to give them anything. They can, the only thing they're responsible for is providing for them until they become a legal adult, and then that's it. So those are some things to consider, though, with blended family dynamics. Okay, and that goes for not only children in blended families, but pets, relatives that you either one of the members of the couple are caregivers for, that goes for them too. So like if you are ready to get married to the next to your spouse, and you are the primary caregiver of your elderly parent, you know, that elderly parent becomes a part of your family dynamic. And the discussion has to be made in terms of whether you could still be the primary caregiver of that elderly parent after you get married. If the other I don't want to do that. I don't want to take on that responsibility. That's your responsibility. You had that going on before the marriage. if you're gonna marry me, no, you can't do that any longer. Then that person would have to make the hard decision. Okay, if I'm not going to be no longer be the primary caregiver of this elderly parent, who is? And make those arrangements. Because that spouse doesn't have anything to do with your arrangements or anything that happened before the marriage. You understand what I'm saying? So also, if you get married and you had a child from a previous relationship, the child's other parent, be it the father or the mother, that person is still very much that child's parent. Okay, your new spouse has the option of whether or not they want to be in that child's life as an additional parent. They have that option. If they don't want to, technically you can't force them to. Okay. Sometimes when children are small and a parent, a single parent then gets married, they want to explore the option of their spouse adopting their child so that their child will have the same last name as their spouse, even though the child comes from a previous relationship. Again, all parents have to be contacted. The parent that's not involved in the marriage, they have to be contacted, and they would have to literally sign over their parental rights in order for the new spouse or the spouse that wants to adopt a child, in order for them to be able to adopt the child. If that other parent does not sign over their parental rights, that parent is still that child's full parent, and the spouse that wanted to adopt the child can act as a step parent, but they can't change that child's last name. They can't fully take over, the responsibilities of that child, because that other parent is still very much legally that child's parent, and so the two parents of that child have to have a discussion, and really hash out what will it mean if one of the parents gets married or gets married again. Like, what would be that person's spouse relationship to the child? And you have to make that clear. Me personally, when I got married for the second time, my children received my husband as their stepdad, and they now have two dads, that they interact with, and all of that, that my husband and I, we talked about that. How would that, look and feel to the children? My youngest was 4 years old when my husband came into my children's lives. And so my youngest son really looks at husband, his stepdad, as dad. He really didn't know his biological father. And so that's how that worked out. He knows, my youngest son knows who his father is, but in terms of the way he chooses to interact, with both his dads. He considers his stepdad his dad. You know, he looks at his dad as his father, biological father, but that's it. You know, but it was clear there was a discussion had, many discussions had, even while Kenneth and I were dating and everything. Kenneth had discussions with my sons separate from me, where they discussed how things would, you know, look and feel and all that kind of thing, so that by the time we got married and everything, everybody was clear, everybody was on the same page. So I suggest that, you know, I recommend that, you know, if you are dating or engaged to be remarried and there's children, you have to include the children in those conversations so that everyone is on the same page. That makes the whole blended family process go a whole lot smoother. And
It truly does.
yeah.
It truly does. I've had family members that entered into a marriage. I had, sorry about that. I had a family member that entered into a marriage, but he, when he entered into the marriage, his wife, he was told had no kids. And of course that wasn't so. And unfortunately, a pastor even helped to cover up that lie. Like, you know, things happen. This is, we live in a real world, whether we're Christians or non-Christians, we live in a real world that real life issues affect each and every one of us. And so this is the reason why we all decided that this would be one of the topics that we discuss. And I pray that it helps someone. I'm glad you brought up the fact that the marriage license does take precedence over everything, no matter whether it's a common law situation or even being engaged. I have known folks that have been engaged for years. They're engaged 10, 15 years. Does not a marriage make? But in that 10, 15 years, you're not staying stagnant. You're not staying still. You're amassing and putting together, you know, whether it's your 401k, by purchasing a home together. A lot of folks do that. They get engaged and purchase a home with the intention of getting married. And there are folks that they will have kids, even sire children, and 10, 15 years later, still haven't gotten married, but live as if they're married. However, and like I said, situations have happened, you know, to folks within communities that, yeah, they've done that. And then one and their children, you know, we can't take for granted. And you know, and other folks, I remember another that they had a will, and they had family members, relatives that they had put there, right? And so when they did that, lo and behold, you know, so it is imperative. It's very important that, you know, these conversations are had. You know, you may not feel to have it, but, you know, we live in a fallen world. Hey, so young folks getting married, folks entering into marriage with others, even though they've been previously married. I do hope that this information benefits all. And I have put in the link, the New York State Office of the Comptroller, where you can go and find unclaimed funds. I tell you what, check it, because I remember I had bought stocks for my kids many years ago. And, they had the certificate, and, over the years, they become young adults. So I was like, and one day I went on there and checked, and lo and behold, you know, and the thing about it, if it's stocks, you can actually have it reverted, or you can retrieve the cash amount for the what the stock is worth at that time. So, but there are folks who've had properties that they didn't know they had, bank accounts that family members may, and sometimes folks have, they bank at a certain bank, they leave, they forgot about it, or, moved out of the area, and totally forgot about it. And so there it is. So, check it out. You just go in, you put in your name, and so forth and so on. I'm not sure, Crystal, and Crystal's in Maryland, and Rev. I don't know. I know that's so for New York State, but what about other states? Is the same thing? I was saying to my daughter earlier, I said, well, maybe if they put in their state, if you're in another state, but I'm not sure. I do know that this is so for New York State, but I should think it's that way for other states as well. Right?
It is. Every state comptroller website has that.
I thought so, because it wouldn't make sense otherwise.
Comptroller, Department of Finance, something like that would have the unclaimed funds.
Yeah. Thank you. So whatever state you're in, hey, it's worth checking out. You never know. There might be some monies that you could use, or even property. You never know. You might be saying, hey, I have nowhere to live, and there's some property that belongs to you. So go to your state comptroller's website, and you can always plug in your name, and or your parents' name, or your grandparents' name. How about that? Because sometimes there's that. And as long as you can prove that you are a relative, then okay. That being said, I do trust that this information was pertinent, and that it did make sense to you, and maybe has some relevance to you. And I do pray that you'll have a wonderful summer. Be safe. Know where you're going when you go where you're going. Check the egress, whatever entrance you come in, check to make sure there are other exits, and just be an alert citizen as you go out and have fun. And if you're in groups where alcohol is being used, people are getting, it's summer, heated, so you have to be careful. Maybe you should leave, just be safe. Just trust and your instincts. And if you're a child of God, definitely trust God. He'll never lead you wrong. So be safe, everyone. I pray your children are safe, and you can tune in to Wake the Nation in September. So new topics. All righty. So have a good night. Thanks to my co-hosts, Deacon Reverend Chaplain Thais Love, and Mrs. Crystal Collier, my Ijamija. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and enjoy your summer. Thank y'all for joining. Good night. Thanks, Rev. See, life happens. She had another assignment, but because she's diligent, she still tuned in while on the road. So, this is what we do. We do what we have to do for you because we care. So, thank you. Have a good night, all.
Good night, everyone.
And I forgot. I see Bishop Anderson is watching. Thanks. Hi, guys. Hello, Paulette and Danette. And hi. Oh, Dr. Lawrence, how are you? Hey, Joy, how you doing, girl? So thanks, everyone, for tuning in. All right. Have a good night, everyone.